What happens when one of wrestling's most respected figures walks into what should be a routine late-night interview, only to discover the host has prepared an ambush designed to humiliate him on national television? Tonight, we're diving deep into the explosive confrontation that left audiences stunned and John Cena walking off set in disgust. This isn't your typical celebrity spat. This is about respect, integrity, and what happens when a talk show host's ego spirals completely out of control. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story gets more intense with every passing minute. The green room backstage at Jimmy Kimmel Live was unusually quiet that Tuesday evening. John Cena sat reviewing his mental notes, preparing for what his publicist had assured him would be a lighthearted conversation about his latest movie and his charitable work with Make-A-Wish Foundation. He had done hundreds of these interviews over the years, from wrestling promotions to Hollywood red carpets, and tonight felt like it would be another routine appearance to promote his upcoming action film. "Mr. Cena, we're ready for you in 5 minutes," announced a production assistant, clipboard in hand and headset buzzing with chatter from the control room. Cena nodded, straightening his navy blue suit jacket. He had specifically chosen a conservative, professional look tonight, wanting to present himself as the serious actor he had worked so hard to become. Gone were the flashy wrestling trunks and the over-the-top personas. This was John Cena, the philanthropist, the actor, the man who had granted more wishes for terminally ill children than any other celebrity in history. Meanwhile, in his dressing room across the hall, Jimmy Kimmel was having a very different kind of preparation session. His head writer, Marcus, stood nearby with a tablet full of notes and a concerned expression on his face. "Jimmy, I really think we should reconsider this approach," Marcus said, scrolling through the prepared questions. "These questions are pretty aggressive, especially the stuff about his wrestling background and the personal attacks. Cena's camp specifically requested we focus on the movie and his charity work." Kimmel turned away from his mirror, where he had been adjusting his tie with an almost manic precision. His eyes had a strange gleam that Marcus had learned to recognize over their years of working together. It was the look Jimmy got when he felt like a guest was getting too much positive press, when he decided someone needed to be taken down a peg. "Marcus, that's exactly the problem," Kimmel said, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there during their afternoon meeting. "Everyone treats this guy like he walks on water. Mr. Perfect. Mr. Make-A-Wish. Mr. Hollywood. Someone needs to ask the real questions, and it might as well be me. But the questions you've written, they're not journalism, Jimmy. They're character assassination. You're asking him about steroid use from 15 years ago, about whether his charity work is just for publicity, about his personal relationships. This isn't what we agreed on." Kimmel's expression hardened. He had been riding high on a wave of viral clips lately, moments where he had made guests visibly uncomfortable, and the internet had eaten it up. The more controversial the moment, the more views it generated, and the more his bosses smiled at the advertising revenue. But somewhere along the way, creating viral moments had become more important than having actual conversations. "Look, Marcus, I've been doing this show for 20 years. I know what makes good television, and it's not another puff piece about how wonderful John Cena is. The audience wants to see something real, something raw. They want to see these celebrities when their PR masks slip off. This isn't about showing something real, Jimmy. This is about ambushing a guy who came here in good faith. His people specifically said he's been dealing with some personal stuff lately and wanted to keep things positive." Kimmel waved dismissively. "Personal stuff. Everyone's got personal stuff. That doesn't mean he gets a free pass from honest questions." Marcus closed his tablet with a snap. "These aren't honest questions, Jimmy. Half of these are based on internet rumors and gossip. The steroid thing has been debunked for years. The charity stuff, you're literally asking him if he only helps sick kids for publicity. How is that honest?" "Sometimes you have to push people to get to the truth," Kimmel replied. But his voice lacked conviction. Deep down, he knew Marcus was right. But his ego had taken control. Now he had convinced himself that this was about journalistic integrity, when really, it was about proving he could rattle someone who seemed unshakable. The production assistant knocked on Kimmel's door. "Mr. Kimmel, we're starting in 2 minutes. Mr. Cena is already walking to his position." "Perfect timing," Kimmel said, grabbing his question cards. As he walked toward the stage, Marcus called after him one last time. "Jimmy, I'm telling you, this is going to backfire. Cena isn't some reality TV star looking for attention. He's a respected guy who's earned his reputation the hard way. You attack him like this, and you're going to look like the villain. But Kimmel was already walking away, his mind made up. He had decided that tonight was going to be the night he proved that nobody, not even John Cena, was above being challenged on his show. Out on the stage, the audience was buzzing with excitement. Jimmy Kimmel Live had a reputation for surprise moments, and many of the fans in attendance were hoping they might witness something memorable. They had no idea just how memorable this evening was about to become. John Cena walked out to thunderous applause, waving to the crowd with his characteristic humble smile. He had always been gracious with fans, whether they were wrestling enthusiasts or moviegoers, and tonight felt no different. He shook hands with Jimmy, exchanged what appeared to be friendly pleasantries, and settled into the guest chair with the relaxed confidence of someone who had done this dance countless times before. "So, John, great to have you back on the show," Jimmy began, his tone seemingly warm and welcoming. "You look fantastic, very professional tonight. Really trying to shed that wrestling image, aren't you?" Cena chuckled, thinking this was just typical late-night banter. "Well, Jimmy, I've never tried to shed anything. Wrestling made me who I am, and I'm proud of that. But yeah, I'm excited to talk about the new movie and some of the charity work we've been doing." "Right. The charity work," Jimmy said. And something in his tone made Cena's internal alarm bells start ringing. "We'll definitely get to that, but first I have to ask, and I think our audience deserves to know, how much of your success in wrestling was natural talent versus, shall we say, chemical enhancement?" The audience fell silent. This wasn't the playful ribbing they expected from a Kimmel interview. This was a direct accusation delivered with a smile, but carrying the weight of a sledgehammer. Cena's expression shifted subtly. The relaxed confidence was still there, but now it was tempered with confusion and a growing awareness that this interview was not going to go as planned. "I'm sorry, Jimmy, but I'm not sure what you're implying. I've been tested more times than I can count throughout my wrestling career, and I've always been clean. That's a matter of public record." "Public record?" "Sure," Jimmy pressed, consulting his cards with theatrical precision. "But we both know how easy it is to work around those systems. Come on, John. You went from a relatively small guy to one of the most physically imposing wrestlers in the business almost overnight. That doesn't happen naturally." The audience was getting uncomfortable now. This wasn't the fun, lighthearted Jimmy Kimmel they were used to. This felt more like a hostile interrogation than an entertainment show. Cena leaned forward slightly, his voice remaining calm, but gaining an edge. "Jimmy, I'm going to stop you right there. I've spent 20 years building my reputation on hard work, dedication, and integrity. I've never taken performance-enhancing drugs, and I find it pretty disappointing that you'd come at me with these kinds of accusations on national television without any evidence whatsoever." "Evidence," Jimmy repeated, as if the word amused him. "Well, let's talk about evidence then. What evidence do we have that all this charity work you do, all these Make-A-Wish visits, what evidence do we have that it's anything more than a carefully crafted PR campaign?" That was the moment everything changed. Cena's expression hardened completely, and for the first time since sitting down, Jimmy Kimmel realized he might have made a serious miscalculation. The silence in the studio was deafening. Even the camera operators seemed to sense that something had gone terribly wrong. John Cena sat perfectly still for what felt like an eternity. His jaw clenched and his eyes locked on Jimmy's face with an intensity that made the host shift uncomfortably in his chair. "Excuse me," Cena said finally, his voice quiet, but carrying a dangerous edge. "Did you just suggest that my work with terminally ill children is a publicity stunt?" Jimmy tried to maintain his composure, but beads of sweat were forming on his forehead. The audience was dead silent, and he could feel the energy in the room turning against him. Still, his ego wouldn't let him back down. "I'm just asking the questions that people are thinking. John, you have to admit the timing of these charity appearances always seems to coincide with your movie releases or big wrestling events. It's a fair question." "A fair question," Cena repeated slowly, as if testing the words. "Jimmy, I've spent over 15 years of my life visiting children who are fighting for their lives. I've held the hands of kids who didn't make it to their next birthday. I've been to more funerals than I care to count. And you think that's a publicity stunt?" The camera caught Jimmy swallowing hard. He was beginning to realize that he had stepped into territory he couldn't navigate his way out of, but his pride wouldn't let him retreat. "Look, I'm not trying to attack your character, John. I'm just saying that in Hollywood, everything is calculated. Every move is strategic. You can't tell me that your people don't coordinate these visits with your publicity schedule." "My people," Cena said, his voice getting quieter, which somehow made it more menacing. Jimmy, when a 7-year-old girl named Sarah in Ohio asked to meet me 3 weeks ago, and I drove 6 hours to spend 4 hours with her family. Who exactly do you think calculated that? When I attended her funeral last Tuesday, which photographer do you think I brought along? The color drained from Jimmy's face. This was not going according to plan at all. The audience was starting to murmur, and not in a good way. He could hear people whispering, and the tone was clearly sympathetic to Cena. I wasn't trying to, look, these are just questions that journalists have to ask. Journalists? Cena interrupted, and there was no hiding the disdain in his voice. Now is that what you think you are, Jimmy? A journalist? Because journalists do research. Journalists check their facts. Journalists don't ambush guests with baseless accusations on national television. Jimmy's producer was frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, making throat-slashing motions. But Jimmy was too deep in his own ego to pay attention. Instead of cutting to commercial, instead of apologizing, instead of doing anything that might have saved the situation, he doubled down. Okay, fine. Let's talk about facts, then. Let's talk about your wrestling career. Let's talk about all those times you buried younger talent. All those times you politely smiled while stabbing people in the back. Let's talk about how you've carefully crafted this nice guy image while being ruthless behind the scenes. The audience gasped audibly. Several people in the front row were shaking their heads in disbelief. This had gone from uncomfortable to genuinely ugly, and everyone in the studio could feel it. Cena stood up slowly from his chair, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the deliberate movement of someone who had reached his absolute limit. You know what, Jimmy? I came here tonight because I respected this show. I respected what you've built here. I thought we were going to have a conversation about my new movie. Maybe share some laughs. Talk about the work I do with kids who are fighting battles that would break most adults. John, please sit down. We can redirect this, Jimmy stammered, suddenly realizing that he was losing complete control of the situation. No, Jimmy. I don't think we can redirect this, because what you've done here tonight says everything about who you are as a person. You invited me here under false pretenses. You lied to my team about what this interview would be about. And then you used your platform, your show, your audience to attack my character and my integrity. Jimmy was visibly sweating now. The audience was getting restless, and he could hear distinctly negative murmurs directed at him. Not at Cena. I was just trying to have an honest conversation, John. I was trying to get past the PR and talk about real things. Real things, Cena said, his voice rising slightly for the first time. You want to talk about real things, Jimmy? Let's talk about real things. Let's talk about how you've spent the last 10 minutes trying to tear down someone who has dedicated his life to making other people happy. Let's talk about how you've used your platform to spread lies and innuendo. Let's talk about how you've shown complete disrespect for the children I work with by suggesting that their suffering is just a photo opportunity for me. The audience was now openly turning against Jimmy. People were booing, not loudly but distinctly. Jimmy could feel the energy in the room shifting completely, and panic was starting to set in. John, I think you're overreacting. These are standard questions. This is what talk shows do. We ask tough questions. Standard questions, Cena repeated, shaking his head. Jimmy, let me tell you what standard questions look like. Standard questions are, how did you prepare for this role? Standard questions are, what was it like working with your co-stars? Standard questions are not, are you a drug user? Standard questions are not, do you fake caring about dying children for publicity? Jimmy was now looking desperately toward his producers, but they were just as stunned as everyone else. This was live television, and there was no way to take back what had already been said. I never said you fake caring about children, John. You're putting words in my mouth. Am I? Cena challenged. Because you asked me, and I quote, what evidence do we have that all this charity work you do is anything more than a carefully crafted PR campaign? How exactly should I interpret that question, Jimmy? Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He was caught and he knew it. He had said exactly what Cena was accusing him of saying, and there was no way to spin it. You know what the saddest part about this is, Jimmy? It's not that you attacked me. I'm a grown man. I can handle criticism, even unfair criticism. The saddest part is that you've taken this platform. This incredible opportunity you have to reach millions of people, and you've used it to spread cynicism and negativity. The audience was now completely on Cena's side. Jimmy could hear people calling out support for Cena, and he could see people in the front row nodding along with everything the wrestler was saying. When I leave here tonight, Jimmy, I'm going to go home and I'm going to get phone calls from the families of kids I've visited. They're going to ask me about this interview. They're going to ask me why that man on television said those things about their children's hero. And I'm going to have to explain to them that sometimes people say hurtful things just because they can. Jimmy was now sweating profusely, and his hands were shaking slightly. He had completely lost control of the interview, and worse, he was starting to realize that he had made himself look like a complete villain on his own show. John, please, let's take a commercial break and we can start over. Start over? Cena asked, incredulous. Jimmy, you can't unsay what you've already said. You can't unaccuse me of being a fraud and a drug user. You can't take back the suggestion that I exploit sick children for publicity. There's no starting over from that. The tension in the studio was now palpable. Even the production crew was looking uncomfortable, and Jimmy's producer was making increasingly frantic gestures from behind the cameras. But Jimmy, in his panicked state, made the worst possible decision he could have made. Instead of backing down, instead of apologizing, instead of doing anything that might have salvaged even a shred of dignity, Jimmy Kimmel decided to go nuclear. You know what, John? Maybe you're right. Maybe I should ask easier questions. Maybe I should just let you sit here and pretend like you're some kind of saint. But the truth is, people are tired of the fake nice guy act. People want to see the real John Cena, not this carefully manufactured version. The audience erupted, not in applause, but in genuine shock and disgust. People were now openly booing Jimmy, and several audience members were standing up, clearly preparing to leave. Cena looked at Jimmy with something that went beyond anger, beyond disappointment. It was pity. The fake nice guy act, Cena repeated slowly. Jimmy, do you hear yourself right now? You've spent the last 15 minutes attacking my character, my integrity, my work with children, and now you're calling me fake for defending myself. I'm calling you fake because that's what you are, Jimmy shot back, his voice cracking with desperation. Nobody is that perfect, John. Nobody spends that much time with sick kids unless they're getting something out of it. Nobody is that humble, that gracious, that giving without an agenda. The studio fell completely silent. Even the camera operators had stopped moving. This wasn't television anymore. This was a complete meltdown happening in real time. Cena stared at Jimmy for a long moment, then slowly shook his head. You know what, Jimmy? I actually feel sorry for you. I feel sorry for you because you've become so cynical, so bitter that you can't believe someone might actually care about other people without having an ulterior motive. You've become so consumed with creating viral moments and generating controversy that you've forgotten what it means to be a decent human being. Jimmy's face was now red with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. Don't you dare psychoanalyze me, John. You don't know anything about me. You're right. I don't know you personally, but I know what you've shown me tonight. You've shown me someone who lies to guests about interview topics. You've shown me someone who attacks people's charitable work. You've shown me someone who thinks being cruel is the same thing as being honest. The audience was now completely silent, hanging on every word. This had become something none of them had expected to witness. I've been doing this show for 20 years, Jimmy said, his voice shaking now. I've interviewed thousands of people. I know how this business works. Do you? Cena asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've forgotten how basic human decency works. You invited me here under false pretenses, Jimmy. You told my team this would be about my movie and my charity work, and instead you've spent the entire time trying to tear me down. Jimmy was now visibly trembling. The weight of what he had done was finally hitting him, but his ego still wouldn't let him surrender. Fine. You want honesty? Here's honesty. You're leaving, aren't you? You're going to walk off my show and make me look like the bad guy. Jimmy, you made yourself look like the bad guy. I didn't have to do anything. You did it all yourself. With that, Cena turned toward the audience. The camera followed him as he walked to the edge of the stage. I want to apologize to everyone who came here tonight expecting to see a fun interview. You didn't pay for tickets to watch someone attack my character or question my motives for helping children. You deserved better than this. The audience began to applaud, slowly at first, then building to thunderous approval. People were standing now, giving Cena a genuine ovation. Behind him, Jimmy sat frozen at his desk, sweat dripping down his face, completely unsure of what to do next. His producer was making desperate cutting motions, but Jimmy seemed paralyzed. Cena turned back to Jimmy one final time. Jimmy, I hope someday you remember why you got into this business in the first place. I hope you remember that your platform is supposed to bring people joy, not tear them down. And I hope you remember that the children I work with, the families I visit, they're real people with real struggles, not props for your entertainment." With that, John Cena walked off the stage. The audience continued to applaud as he disappeared backstage, leaving Jimmy Kimmel sitting alone at his desk, facing the uncomfortable reality of what he had just done to himself on national television. The camera stayed on Jimmy's face for several seconds, capturing his complete bewilderment and the dawning realization that he had just committed career suicide on live television. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came. Finally, someone in the control room had the mercy to cut to commercial, but the damage was already done. In less than 20 minutes, Jimmy Kimmel had transformed from a respected late-night host into the villain of his own show. All because his ego couldn't handle the idea that someone might actually be as decent as they appeared to be. The irony was devastating. In trying to expose John Cena as a fraud, Jimmy had only succeeded in exposing himself as exactly the kind of person he had accused Cena of being. Someone who put his own interests above basic human decency. What started as an ambush had become a complete character assassination, but not of the intended target. Jimmy Kimmel had assassinated his own character on his own show in front of his own audience. And John Cena had simply stood there and let him do it. So there you have it, the complete breakdown of how one man's ego and desperation for viral moments led to one of the most uncomfortable television moments in recent memory. What did you think about Jimmy's complete meltdown? Do you think John Cena handled it the right way? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Showdown Buzzder Stories for more incredible breakdowns, confrontations, and dramatic moments like this.